Re-Zero, Side Story, The Land of Wolves, Death Unto the Weak, No Mercy 3, Chapter 1.
She was drawn in by the crackling of burning firewood, causing her consciousness to slowly surface up. The first thing that leapt out to her after she woke up was the starry sky. The stars were shimmering between the gaps left by the specks of cloud, and a chilly breeze brushed against her bare skin. Like that, caressed by the wind and hampered by the chill, there came a pain in her back that pierced her mind. Gah! A quivering groan escaped her lips as she felt this searing pain from her back. However, what escaped from her had its origin in the thoughts about the cause of her pain, rather than the pain itself. Who had given her this wound? And by what means had she gotten it? Well, that was, General First Class Arakia, it looks like you're awake. A voice rang out, and with that, the agony that tore at her mind and body immediately dispersed. What took seed in her instead was caution. However, she promptly dismissed it, deeming it a pointless worry. The person who had called out to her was garbed in the red and black uniform that typified a soldier of the Empire, something she was all too accustomed to seeing. After all, she was also part of the military, just like that Imperial soldier. Arakia, where am I? Imperial soldier, we're currently in the mountains, after fleeing west from the fortress city. I feared we'd be pursued if we took the main road, so I gave priority on being safe over being quick. Arakia, fortress, city. Pursued. She received a clear answer to her hoarse question, and from it, she began to pick up some words she knew. What had happened in the fortress city, her standoff with a foe she despised, and finally her reunion with scintillating flame. In the end, her actions had been in vain, going through sheer misery and getting the wound on her back. Arakia, you helped me. Imperial soldier, yes ma'am. But not just by my own strength. There was someone else who acted as a decoy so we could rescue you, General First Class. If you please, do keep their devotion in mind. Arakia, MHM. All right, she looked for signs of people around, but she could not sense anyone other than the soldier in front of her. Furthermore, she could tell from the flow of the wind and the clear star-studded sky that they were a long way away from any human habitation like cities and villages. There were no lies in the words of the soldier. She had been rescued, and sacrifices had been made to achieve that. Therefore, Arakia, I'll respond to all your hard work. What is your name? Imperial soldier, right away ma'am. The one who acted as the decoy was Private First Class, Jamal Orally. Arakia, yeah, of course, him too. She cast her eye down at the soldier. He had placed his hand against his chest in salute and answered her clearly. The individual who had ended up as the decoy must have been someone the soldier had been close with. She could see that from the eager way he wanted to leave behind his great deed, even if but a trifle. Arakia, what I'd like to hear right now is your name. Bearing that in mind, she asked for the name of the soldier right in front of her, the one who, after losing his comrade in arms, had resolutely brought her out of the perilous fortress city. His eyes grew wide as he realized what she had meant by her question. Imperial soldier, it's Private First Class, Todd Fang, General First Class Arakia, and so he replied to Arakia's question.
Chapter 2.
Todd, this is going to sting a bit, General First Class, Arakia, NH. She felt something cold on her back, followed by throbbing pain coming from her wound. Arakia surrendered her body to Todd, looking over at the flickering flames of the campfire as he applied some ointment on her back. The fire lit up the place they had set up camp at, shrouded by the darkness of dusk. Usually it would be a complete no-go to have fires, since there was the worry that beasts and bandits could be invited to attack. However, in cases in which someone's wounds had to be patched up, there was probably enough leeway to bend the rules. First things first, there was no way that beasts were going to approach them, with Arakia here. And if any bandits showed up, they would be simply made to regret it. Her back stung in pain as she thought about that. Arakia, she could not see her own back, but according to Todd, the slash wound she had received had been burnt, and appeared to be in quite the state. She didn't really care much about having scars, but as she had been ordered to not mar her soft skin with wounds, She had exercised as much care as she could to not get any, but then again, Arakia, princess, the one who had wounded Arakia's back was the very same mistress who had once given her this command. Todd, all done, General First Class. The ointment's my own kind of blend, but I can assure you it'll work. Arakia, thanks so much for all the help. Todd, hey, don't sweat it. After Todd finished patching her up and spoke those words, Arakia slowly lowered her raised arms. The bandages he'd used to close up the wound on her back were wrapped tightly, however, they didn't impede her movement. The soldier was an extremely well-prepared one, familiar with medical treatment and his own ointments. Todd, I've always been the sort to get injured, so I got into the habit of keeping myself prepared for one thing or another. Arakia, I didn't say anything about that though. Todd, oh right, I apologize if I was off the mark. It's just that, I felt like you were thinking to yourself, this guy sure is well prepared, so my mistake. Arakia, Todd deftly tidied up his belongings as Arakia remained speechless at how good his guess had been. In fact, she was impressed that he'd been looking at her so closely. Yet at the same time, she didn't really think it was great that he could guess her innermost thoughts. That went double for them, given one was a warrior, and the other a soldier. Todd, after all, reading what's in someone's mind is like reading what they hold in their hands. Arakia, Todd, just a bad habit of mine. One which I also think isn't that great. Todd placed his hand against his forehead as he once again guessed her innermost thoughts, as if he couldn't help himself. He then swiftly continued his words with a however. Todd, a foot soldier like myself has to be quick on his feet. You're a general first class, so you should get it, that I'm not that skilled. The preparations I make ahead of time are mere tricks to make up for what I lack. Arakia looked back at Todd as he jabbered away giving his explanation and deemed he was telling the truth. He had a lithe, well-built body, thus she could see he was above the norm in ability for a soldier of the Empire. However, compared to Arakia, compared to the fighters who were called generals, his inferiority was plain and clear. Naturally, he was no match for Arakia. She could literally tear Todd into little pieces in mere seconds with her power. And yet, despite having such power, Arakia, was abandoned. By my princess, 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 by my princess. Todd, Jamal served as the decoy, however, he was such a huge dumbass. All of a sudden, another voice interjected her own, bleaching over her thoughts. Arakia quickly looked up. In front of her, Todd gazed at the crackling fire next to them, his eyes looking like they were staring off into space, as if wishing for memories to vanish off into the great yonder. Todd, it's already been 6 years since I first met Jamal. It was around the time I took part in the campaign in the fortress city of Garkla. Arakia, Garkla, Todd, the city that was destroyed by a Sin archbishop, the place where 8 arms met his demise. It's been completely rebuilt now, but it used to be under reconstruction back then, and bandits had joined forces across factions to attack it each day. You could really feel the grandiosity coming from Todd's memories, in stark contrast to the calm way he recited it. The fortress city of Garkla was one of the most prominent cities in the Wallachian Empire. However, around 10 odd years ago, back when Arakia was still young, records showed that miscreants had acted out violently against the Empire. From what they stated, back then, a man of the multi-armed tribe, who had been hailed as a hero some decades prior, had defended the fortress city. The hero had bought enough time for the people of the city to escape, dying majestically in battle, and from then on, the fortress city was deeply ravaged by the after-effects of that. Its reconstruction began, but plodded along slowly, partially thanks to repeated assaults by bandits who were active in the vicinity. It was pretty much like Todd had stated, Garkla had only become seen as a city again in the past 1 or 2 years. They'd kept hearing about it as being a dangerous place that hadn't gotten any better for so long. Todd, the city kept being attacked over and over again by bandits. There were many who thought about abandoning it. However, one of the key figures who broke the deadlock was Jamal. Arakia, he. You know, Todd, he slew one of the leaders of the bandits, killing the enemy's morale. After that, the soldiers of the Empire pressed in right away and wiped them out. He managed to get that victory at the cost of one of his eyes. Todd clenched his fist, looking as if the results his friend had brought were something to take pride in. Even Arakia could tell he'd definitely accomplished something great. However, Arakia, I've never heard of them, Todd. As I said, he was a huge dumbass. He seemed to think it was cool to not go around talking about it, even though what he accomplished was exceptional. And because of that, he didn't covet any prizes for his work. To think that he could have been a general if he'd felt like it. Arakia, Todd, that's the kind of guy he was, so I couldn't just leave him to his own devices. I wanted to make him into a general eventually, even though he kept saying we could become one. Todd's voice grew small as he spoke, and before he knew it, he had his face buried in his hands. He had lost the one he'd accumulated so much history with, he had lost the one he'd envisioned a big future with, and yet here he was, still alive. The situation Todd was left in was one Arakia could painfully empathize with, and at the same time, Arakia remembered the individual who had brought this throbbing pain in her back. Todd, my fiancée is in the imperial capital. Jamal's little sister. Arakia, huh, Todd, she's got various physical ailments, so she needs someone to help her. But Jamal isn't here anymore, so that's why I have to be there for her. As he said those words, Todd lowered his hands where he'd had his face buried in, and burning there in his eyes, was determination. He had a strong sense of duty. And to add to that, a determination that encompassed not just his own, but that of his fallen friend. And with that still lit in his eyes, Todd called out to her, Todd, Arakia. The same applies for you. Enough with that hopeless look in your eye, Arakia. Todd, neither of us have the time for this. You cherish them, right? If that's the case, never let go of them. Don't let her be taken away from you. Living in the Wallachian Empire, that is our right, that is our duty. Baring his teeth, Todd leaned forward, zeal amidst his words as he fiercely urged Arakia. Don't let go of the one you cherish, he'd said. Don't accept losing her, he'd said. Arakia's single eye widened in response as she gawked back at Todd. Todd, oh. Why, you have my apologies. I got fired up without even realizing. Right then, Todd realized the tone he was speaking in had grown wild. All in a fluster, he went back to using Keigo. However, Arakia shook her head at him, caught in his apology, and said it's okay. Arakia, if talking that way makes it easier, then it's okay. Todd, General First Class, Arakia, I shall go back to the imperial capital. Come along with me. Arakia declared this as she looked directly into Todd's eyes. She had thought everything was over, despairing. However, as she'd been told by Todd, she'd been rescued thanks to this fine individual called Jamal giving his life away. And thus she realized it was too early to end everything. If she was going to end things here due to what happened, then she might as well have ended everything 8 years ago from today. The one who had chosen not to do that had been Arakia herself, after she'd gulped down the cup of poisoned liquor. Todd's eyes grew wide open seeing the look in Arakia's eye. She had vowed in her next act that she was not going to give up, and following that, the corners of his lips slowly curved up, faced with Arakia's slightly anxious look. Todd, yeah, all right. Please allow me to accompany you, Arakia. And so he replied, a fierce-looking smile on his face, ever so reminiscent of the sword wolf of the Wallachian Empire.
Chapter 3.
Todd gazed at Arakia, her crimson eyes now full of strength again. She'd fallen fast asleep until morning as soon as she'd gone to take some rest. As he gazed at her, he thought quietly to himself, stoking the fire with a branch. Todd, I can kill her whenever I want, huh? And that was not because she was sleeping so defenselessly, it was because she wasn't so desperate for survival, despite being so overwhelmingly strong. Todd could take advantage of these thoughts, and by that, he deemed that the means he had available to kill her were far too much to count. Naturally though, he didn't have any great reason to kill her, so it wasn't like he was going to act so barbarically. Todd, what I told her about Jamal seems to really have struck a chord with her. After all, Jamal had acted as the decoy in the fortress city to buy time for Todd and Arakia's escape. Knowing what he was like, he must have died in a blaze of glory. Still, he was glad he had a friend who'd proven useful even in death. In fact, he hadn't lied about what happened in Gartla. Jamal had indeed lopped off the bandit chief's head, leading the city to victory, as well as meeting Todd for the first time there. However, Todd hadn't been part of the Imperial forces then. Instead, he'd been one of the chiefs of the bandits, who'd allied with each other. His plan had been to round up all of their leaders once the alliance had grown enough and joined the soldiers of the Empire, having performed that great deed. However, Jamal's heroic actions had made it all come to naught. But even then, Todd, it was thanks to him that I could meet Katya. He has my gratitude for that. Even now, he wouldn't have been able to tie himself together with Katya, Jamal's younger sister, if not for his reckless actions. And it was also thanks to Jamal's efforts that he'd been able to rescue Arakia like this. At the very least, Todd keeping Katya and Arakia safe would serve as Jamal's farewell gift. Todd, luckily, it seems she'll let me bring her back safely to the Imperial capital. Persuading Arakia had been uncharted waters, a challenge which he'd been prepared to put monumental effort into. However, she'd grown fearful of the deteriorating relationship she had with her princess or whatever. Thus she was in such a fragile state, in contrast to her peerless fighting strength. If he presumed this princess was the woman in red he saw back at Garrel's City Hall, then the unnatural defeat that happened in Arakia's self also somewhat made sense. Following that logic, if he set up the narrative keeping in mind the reaction Arakia had, everything was as he could see. Todd, Katya, placing her name on the tip of his tongue, he envisioned the figure of a woman in his mind. She didn't look anything like her older brother, to whom she was related by blood. She was alone in the Imperial capital, waiting for Todd and Jamal to come back. He would need to tell her that her older brother was never going to come back again. The thought of her grief made Todd feel down. But, at the same time, he also took some dark delight at the fact that only he could love such a weak woman who'd been abandoned by pretty much everyone. Arakia, princess. Arakia's breathing, as she slept weakly, was intermingled with the crackle of the fire as it burnt through its kindling. Giving a quick look towards her sleeping body, Todd commanded himself to take care of that girl, with such a slender back, with respect. From here on out, she would be the one who supported Todd. Now that Jamal was dead, he would ever so respectfully feed her, let her fatten herself up, thus guiding her towards his desires. And, Todd, don't you ever become a hindrance to me, Arakia. Todd took out his axe, which he had holstered at his waist, and let out this warning to the sleeping Arakia as he chopped the branches he'd gathered in two. Everything would be fine, so long as she didn't become his enemy. He would take good care of her, so long as she didn't become a hindrance to him. And if someday, she died without being a threat to Todd. Todd, just like with Jamal, I will finally be able to stick along with you with ease if you become a corpse. If she ended up in a position where she could never threaten him, he could stick along with her with open arms.